Hello, this is Justin Williams with the Wolfpacker Podcast. I'm joined today, as always, by co-host Matt Carter. And today we're going to catch up on a few new developments in Wolfpack athletics over the past couple weeks. Haven't had Matt on in about 2 weeks now, so figured we'd catch up with Matt. But before we get too far into this episode, this podcast is brought to you in part by JFQ Lending. As we blitz into 2021, JFQ Lending wants the Wolfpacker.com members to take advantage of historically low mortgage rates. JFQ Lending has a Better Business Bureau A rating with over 2,000 reviews. They work with top lenders and do the hard work of finding the best deal for you. If you're curious whether refinancing your mortgage is a good decision, visit jfqlending.com today. That's jfqlending.com. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast wherever you listen to us. We're on the Apple Podcast app, Spotify, Google Play, pretty much everywhere you listen to podcasts. Plus, you can always watch us on YouTube. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel while you're there. Give this video a thumbs up. And please remember to use that promo code PACK60 at thewolfpacker.com for a free 60-day trial on all of our premium content, news, and analysis. Okay, Matt, let's jump right into football. Then we're going to talk a little bit of basketball. Talk a little bit about everything here because we haven't had you on in a couple weeks now. But you and I got to watch.
No politics.
No. Well, let's also avoid pro baseball as well because both of our teams aren't doing so well. Your Cubs are doing a little bit better than my Yankees. They sure do suck. But
Well, we could talk about Carlos Rodon.
we can talk about Carlos Rodon. Okay.
Sure.
Well, let's start with that. Your thoughts on Carlos Rodon's no-hitter? Because, I mean, what a great start to the season for him. I think I saw a stat that he was the first American League pitcher in MLB history to have just 2 hits in his first 2 starts of an MLB season. That's pretty spectacular. I mean, it wasn't just the no-hitter as a great one-off outing. He came out sharp in the first game and actually had a significant amount more of strikeouts. His stuff might have been a little nastier in the opener, but anyways, he gets it done. 1 hit batter rather, short of a perfect game, which would have been ultra special, but nonetheless, the no-hitter was great in and of its own. So, Matt, what were your thoughts on that? Because obviously it's a pretty feel-good story with Carlos Rodon as well.
Yeah, I can remember. I think I may have done one of the very first interviews with Carlos Rodon at NC State. He had just gotten on campus that fall. He's one of 3 guys that were drafted out of high school that chose to come to NC State, and they were very excited about it. And my old dear friend Bruce Winkworth, who unfortunately left us too soon a couple years ago after getting cancer, said that I needed to talk to these 3 guys. So I did it the way, and one of them was a catcher named Brett Austin, who was the first-round draft pick, a very rare first-round draft pick who decided to go to college instead. Another one was a shortstop you might have heard of named Trey Turner. And then the last was Carlos Rodon. And, kind of, in a way, they were all great interviews. I was very impressed with all of them. But Carlos was kind of the guy who felt like, I was just chatting with him. Like, he kind of answered the questions, not like he knew he was being interviewed. He answered the questions like you and I were talking, and you asked him a question, and he answered it. And that was the conversation. So he had a level of maturity that was pretty impressive. So it was fun to see. Kind of threw like the Rodon that we saw at NC State that was just so super dominant when he was at NC State. So first no-hitter by a former NC State pitcher. And I think maybe, with the first no-hitter by a Triangle area Major League pitcher, according to Sean Crest on Twitter. So if that's wrong, you can go after Sean Crest, not me. According to Tim Peeler, Mike Caldwell had the closest other no-hitter for an NC State pitcher. So cool to see history. He's doing well. Trey Turner's doing well. Just reminds you how good that College World Series team was in 2013. And if they were playing in any ballpark but Omaha, they probably could have very, very easily been the national champions that year.
What was it about Omaha that makes you say that?
Well, the team that won it all that year was UCLA. And the way the World Series works is you're broken up into 2 pods of 4. And the winners of their pod play each other for the national championship.
Right.
And so, in essence, whoever wins, the first 2 winners play each other, double elimination. The first 2 winners play each other. Whoever wins that game it's tailor set to move on to the World Series, final best of 3 World Series. And NC State whooped North Carolina behind Carlos Rodon in the first game. I think they beat them like 7-1 or something to that nature.
Yep.
I can remember Rodon walked the first batter, and the Carolina batter kind of he did a little strut. He was kind of, he went like, like that after drawing the walk. I think he was doing it to his bench, to be fair. I don't think he was trying to show up Rodon. He was trying to pump up the bench because I think State had scored in the top half of the inning. And Rodon just looked at him, just stared him down like, are you kidding me? And then proceeded to strike out the next 3 batters to end the inning. So NC State won their game. UCLA won their game. UCLA was a heavy pitching team. In fact, I believe Trevor Bauer, now the best pitcher in baseball, was on that staff. But they did not hit well. But the ballpark in Omaha is a long ballpark. And hits that are home runs and just about every other ballpark get caught in the warning track in Omaha. And so UCLA with this pitching staff was well set up for Omaha. They were leading NC State 2-1. State had a runner on, I believe it was in the 8th inning, and Trey Turner crushed a ball that would have left probably every major league ballpark. But in Omaha, it got caught deep in the warning track. And if I recall, when Trey Turner hit it, he started celebrating. He was convinced he had just put NC State up in the 8th inning, 3-2 over UCLA. And if they had won that game, they would have been easily set to make it to the College World Series. And ironically, on the other side, Mississippi State with this complete Cinderella surprised everybody, won their pod, and then UCLA easily beat Mississippi State to win the College World Series. So it's just a long history lesson of how a ballpark, maybe that's NC State stuff right there, prevented NC State from winning the College World Series.
Well, the first NC State stuff thing I think about when I think about baseball is the Super Regional against TCU, but
that's a pretty bad one. Coastal Carolina is the one that takes the cake, though. I mean, that's the win.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say that's when a game that was delayed over a threat of rain that never came, and then it ended up being stopped with 1 out in the 9th because the rain had gotten so bad that the ball literally, a Coastal Carolina guy hit a hard grounder to third that stopped about halfway but down the line because it was so wet. And if they had just played the game on time, NC State probably wins it. Instead, they had to wait till the next day. They got an out, and then the guy hit a fly ball to right. Brock Deathridge thought he had a sliding catch. Umpire ruled he trapped it. 2 runs scored. 2 runs that runner who probably wouldn't even been on base if it wasn't for the rain the night before, and they were trying to get through it and get the game in, and just a mess. And then, of course, Coastal Carolina went on to win the College World Series after that. So.
Well, I'm glad I asked you about the College World Series appearance, because that was a good little history lesson there. NC State seemed like they were in position if they could have taken that second game against UCLA, but
they would have been so well set up. I mean, it would have been, tailor-made. Because they would have had Rodon available on a full rest.
Right.
Even if they had lost the next game, they still had another game left, and they could have thrown Rodon on a full rest, and he would have mowed down. UCLA couldn't hit, and he owned UNC. He didn't get a lot of wins against UNC because UNC pitchers tend to rise to the occasion against State, but UNC never hit Rodon. And so it would have been we need to bring up some happier memories now. Let's talk about happier stuff.
Well, I was just about to mention Carlos Rodon. He followed up his no-hitter with another strong outing against the Cleveland Indians. 5 innings pitched, just 3 hits in that game. He gets the win in an 8-5 win for the White Sox, and he had 8 strikeouts in 5 innings. He had 9 strikeouts in 5 innings in his season opener against Seattle, which was a 6-0 win. So currently his ERA is 0.47. He has 24 strikeouts in 19 innings pitched. So that's pretty phenomenal.
Yeah, that's pretty fair.
Yeah. I think it's fair to say that Rodon is feeling pretty healthy these days. So good.
It's amazing is he was basically let loose by the White Sox, and they brought him back on a cheaper contract in this offseason. So if the White Sox if he keeps it up, if the White Sox want to keep him around, they're gonna have to pony up this time around.
Well, baseball season is reflective of the time of the year that we are in currently. We are watching baseball on weekday nights. No more college basketball, no more college football. But that doesn't mean that there's not stuff to talk about. We just had the spring football game. We're in the middle of silly season for men's and women's college basketball. Let's start with spring football, Matt, because we haven't been able to talk on this podcast about it. I know we've talked about it off air many times and written several stories, but you and I were both there in Carter Finley Stadium a couple weekends ago to watch the red-white game. I think let's start with the obvious. I mean, what stood out to you the most on offense and defense, and specifically how did Devin Leary look? Because all eyes were on him and his first public outing in Carter Finley Stadium since he broke his leg against Duke last October.
Yeah, I thought he moved around like normal. He didn't show any hesitancy. I didn't see any tentativeness on the leg. That's going to be the big question is what happens when the pass rush comes? What happens the first time he gets hit and tackled? I'd be surprised if he got hit at all this spring. So, taking a hit will be the big question. And interestingly, it talks that the NCAA may dramatically scale back the number of allowed full contact practices this coming preseason. So it'll be interesting to see that aspect. We won't know until a real game if he's mentally over breaking a leg in a game. But, I didn't see any hesitancy or any tentativeness out there. I saw a slow start. He missed an open receiver early. He did throw an interception. He nearly had a second interception. I think he was 1 for 7 to begin the game. Mm-hmm. But then he got going. I think the touchdown pass that he had to Porter Rooks, which was largely on Porter Rooks, kind of loosened him up a little bit. And then he started making some real nice throws. But, the thing that jumps out at the arm strength, the quickness, the velocity, all of that. It can be, one of the issues I thought NC State had last year is maybe the pass protection struggled to hold up a little bit. Part of that is because of Bailey Hockman, and a little bit split second longer getting the ball out. And this is, if you go to the 3-2-1 I wrote on the quarterback, Pro Football Focus broke it down, and it's confirmed. The ball was a split second slower getting out of Bailey Hockman's hands, and then the velocity wasn't quite as there with Bailey Hockman as it is with Devin Leary. So I think Devin Leary could be an offensive lineman's friend. But to me, what stood out offensively, I like the 2 running backs. I thought the 2 running backs held up well. Now you feel that, you still want Bam Knight and Ricky Person kind of leading the way for you, but you feel like, if they get banged up, not all is lost. Certainly Jordan Houston had the background of success at NC State, but I thought Delbert Mims ran pretty well as too.
Yeah, those were exactly my thoughts. Leary definitely looked like he was feeling loose out there. He let a few fly, 30, 40 yards passes down the field. You take out the 1-for-7 start for him, he goes 11 of 16 in the end stretch of that game. I think he was benched after halftime, so that was just one half a play. He finished with 175 yards and 2 touchdowns. Of course, the 1 interception as well. But yeah, we won't know much until the season really starts and the full contact starts to see how much that broken leg is really going to impact his play. But so far, so good, and I think NC State fans can be excited to have their QB1 back in action this fall. And the running backs definitely stood out on offense. Jordan Houston, 10 rushes for 89 yards and a touchdown. He did leave the game late in the second quarter due to impressive, come from behind hit by Jordan Poole, which forced a fumble, but also caught Houston's knee up a little bit. The x-rays came back negative after the game, so that's good news. Probably, I think Dave Doran said he thought it was turf toe more than anything, but nothing serious.
Which hurts, by the way. Turf toe is painful.
Really hurts, but it's good. It's good to hear that it wasn't a serious type of injury or anything. I mean, I know it's spring, and I know there's a lot of time to recover, but you still don't want to see anybody get hurt. And I'd say, all in all, NC State, left that game healthy. They got to see some good showings from their starters. So, all in all, I thought it was a success for NC State in their spring game. I thought the receiving core looked really well. You saw when Leary was connecting with Thayer Thomas and Devin Carter, there's obviously some chemistry there. He was probably his most effective passing to those guys. And, of course, Porter Rooks got loose for a 59-yard touchdown as well. But defensively, it's kind of harder to tell just because it's not 100% full contact, especially the D linemen. I mean,
the numbers can get skewed a little.
Yeah, a real sack isn't really a two-hand touch on the quarterback. You really got to bring that quarterback down. The quarterback's going to try to evade the tackle in a real game. So, maybe a general rule of thumb, actually half of those sacks actually happen in a real game. But anything else that stood out to you specifically from the spring football game, Matt, or do you want to shift our attention over to basketball?
I would just add, too, that we didn't get to see the full team, and I thought they looked pretty decent.
Yeah.
I can only compare it to past spring games. It was nice to have a spring game again. And we should mention real briefly in a second, I think the governor's announcement with the big news coming forward, potentially. But, you got Emeka Amazi wasn't playing. Peyton Wilson and Drake Thomas were not playing. Terrell Dawkins at defensive end didn't play.
No Bam, no Ricky.
No Bam or Ricky. So, I mean, there were quite a few notable guys, even some guys that we didn't know originally were going to be held out, like C.J. Riley, Tyrone Riley, a couple other guys that did not play that are in the mix to have prominent roles. So,
and not to mention, you got Corey Durden and Chandler Zavala on the way, too.
Yep, they should be arriving soon. So this may be the deepest NC State team. I don't know if it's as good top-end talent-wise as the 2017 team was. They were probably good enough to win an ACC. But I heard Joe Giglio say it on the radio, and it's exactly what I heard before as well. That team was probably better 1 through 25. This team is better 1 through 40.
Yep.
And the issue with that 2017 team was once you got past 1 through 25, things got a little dicey. And that showed up in some of the games like Clemson and Notre Dame and Wake Forest. But this team might be better equipped to handle that.
Well, let's talk about the exciting news from Governor Roy Cooper. He announced that the state of North Carolina expects to lift mass gathering restrictions by June 1st, which is months ahead of NC State's scheduled home opener against South Florida, which will be Thursday, September 2nd at Carter Finley Stadium. But for NC State fans, that news is relevant in the sense that we could see full college football stadiums again this season, which, I think you and I have talked about this a lot off air, maybe a little bit, on the podcast, but college sports specifically really misses fans. I think pro sports can get away with it a little bit more because the fans aren't such a integral part of the sport, of the experience, of the entertainment experience at that. I'd say college basketball missed fans more than anybody because I think once you got into a football game, at least when you're watching on TV, it still kind of felt like a football game. But being there seeing, the lower bowl of Carter Finley Stadium on each sideline about half full, at best last season. It was still weird to be there in person, and I know, that's such a big part of the culture around here, the culture around NC State going into the fall. Everybody misses their tailgates at Carter Finley Stadium. Everybody misses being in the stands. I'm sure fans would take all the noon kickoffs they get just to be able to be back in the stands cheering on the Wolfpack. So good news there, and really happy to see that we could maybe be getting back to some normalcy here beginning in the 2021-2022 college athletics season. So just, I guess, your thoughts on that decision.
Yeah, and particularly financially, it could be impactful because, one of the positive developments that we noted when we recapped the State of the Pack was that they originally, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but there was $20 to $25 million budget shortfall was what they had originally anticipated.
I think Boo Corrigan said it was $23 million.
Yeah,
and that's the projection.
And they cut it down to $3 million shortfall, which, look, there were some dramatic cuts involved in that. Let's not kid ourselves. This is not a matter of revenue came way in over what they anticipated. This is a matter of belt tightening worked, and they were able to. Wolfpack Club did a tremendous job of raising money to help. Help the athletic program. So, I think Boo mentioned that north of $5 million was saved, for instance, in salary cuts and furloughs and et cetera, which you never want to see. I mean, that's not the preferred way to save money. So, to be able to get your full revenue back so soon would be a huge boost for NC State. And it would be, you hate to say dodge a bullet, but, maybe, just maybe NC State athletics had dodged the worst case scenario that a lot of fears were of having, at this time last year, or especially over last summer,
Yeah, well, I was just about to say, this is huge news for the NC State athletics program, and I was about to say, I think any Division I college director of athletics, you ask them last June, going into this next athletic season, would you take a $3 million budget shortfall, with all things considered, knowing at that point in time, college football season was far from a certainty. NC State ends up playing 12 games in the fall. College basketball season at that was far from a certainty. They had a little bit more bumps in the road than football just because of roster sizes and the fact that it's an indoor venue, a little bit closer quarters. But nonetheless, college basketball season ends up finishing. There's a national champion crowd. NC State played over 20 games. So all in all, I think, considering the unprecedented of a pandemic, a once-in-a-century type of pandemic, I think you'll take the situation that NC State appears to have put itself in, considering all the cuts and all the work that the Wolfpack Club did. So you got to tip your cap to those guys because, man, that was really impressive to shrink a $23 million deficit just down to $3 million. So good going there. Speaking of basketball, let's talk a little bit about college basketball. We are in silly season, as we've mentioned. If you are a regular on the Wolfpacker.com, you would know that NC State men's basketball has picked up 2 new transfers. You've got Greg Gant from Providence, a power forward, and you've got a guard, Casey Morsell from Virginia, coming to NC State. They both committed, at least for the time being. It seems to be somewhat of a stable situation in terms of NC State's roster. Of course, senior guard Braxton Beverly announced that he was transferring. He ended up committing to Eastern Kentucky, where he will play his final season of college basketball. And the freshman forward Nick Farrar also transferred out of the program. He went to College of Charleston. So, Matt, I've been kind of talking about this as, Gant and Morsell, kind of similar situations in the sense that they were highly touted recruits out of high school in the 2019 class. Specifically, NC State targeted Gant out of high school. They didn't target Morcell, but Morcell, a guy that's familiar with the landscape of the ACC, started, I think, over 15 games for Virginia, has appeared in over 45 games in the ACC. So you got two guys that, come in with a background that they are highly touted recruits out of high school, and they just go to programs where things necessarily didn't work out the way they intended. The numbers of these guys through their first 2 seasons of college basketball are not going to wow you by any stretch of the imagination, but I think it's a matter of a strategic play for the Wolfpack and going in with the mentality that, look, these guys have talent. I mean, if we believe in recruiting rankings and we believe in star ratings, these guys have shown an ability to perform at a very high level in their past. And maybe it's just a matter of finding the right fit for them. Maybe these are two guys that can benefit from Kevin Keatts' up-tempo system. They both seem like guys that are going to be defensive fits in terms of how much Keatts likes to switch. He likes to have players that are able to switch to multiple positions on the court, ideally 1 through 4 if you're working with a guard. Gant's a guy that can guard the perimeter. Morcell's a guy at 6'3" with I think I saw that his wingspan was like 6'7", 6'8", something pretty impressive where he can switch up to, smaller forwards as well. So to me, these seem like guys that, you take a little bit of a gamble and you never know what's going to work out on the other end because, if it's a better fit for them here in Raleigh, they could work out really, really well.
Yeah, and we've talked about Gant before. I remember talking about how you got to kind of remember the circumstances of what's happened for him at Providence. His mother passes away shortly before his freshman season begins, and then the sophomore year was, it wasn't a fun year for anybody in college basketball. Playing the games were a reprieve from everything else, but getting to the games were not fun. And it wasn't as fun as it normally is. So I think you kind of have to, you and I talked about it, you got to remember these are young men, fresh out of high school. They do have a life outside of basketball. They're still forming. They're still, getting into adulthood. And, Greg Gant didn't get the full college experience at Providence that most of us would have gotten. And, I think a fresh start could be something right away that really helps him out. And, with Casey Morcell, I think that the basic gist of what I understand is he just kind of lost some confidence in the shot. The shot looked good in high school.
Yep.
It just wasn't falling for him at Virginia. And it wasn't falling for a lot of guys at Virginia, to be honest, if you're looking at the numbers, other than Sam Hauser and Jay Huff and Trey Murphy. But the guards at Virginia just didn't shoot well. And that was an issue. So, maybe kind of getting a fresh start for him and refining that shot and getting the confidence. Kevin Keatts is going to let him fly and let him shoot. It gives you the green light. Maybe that'll help him a little bit. Maybe, I don't know how Virginia's system works, but maybe at Virginia, you're not shooting well, you don't quite get the green light. Maybe Kevin Keatts will give you to refine your shot. I don't know, but there's also this aspect that sometimes I think our expectations for young players get out of whack a little bit. And sometimes remember, hey, it takes a couple of years for guys to kind of click and figure it out. And so let's not completely write them off because after 2 years, they're not stars yet. I mean, they're still, as you mentioned, they were top 50, 75 range recruits for a reason. They were wanted by a lot of guys for a reason.
Yep.
And, maybe it just takes a couple of years for them. But there have been plenty of cases. Good example, the young man at Georgia Tech that played a big role in them winning the ACC title, Jordan Usher. Yeah. He didn't put up great numbers at Southern Cal for a couple of years, but he blossomed at Georgia Tech, became a real nice player, and he's going to be back next year. Aluma at Virginia Tech, he wasn't putting up anywhere near these kind of numbers.
Yeah.
And he was at Wofford, I believe. And then he was an ACC Player of the Year candidate this year. So you never know how the transfers are going to pan out. You had sometimes to get these mid-major transfers that put up big numbers. They don't pan out for you um, at your next stop. And sometimes sometimes you get the kind of low profile ones are the ones that really step up. So, what I like is they both have experience. They both have started. They both played consistently at the highest level of college basketball. Um, and so at a minimum, they give NC State some depth. I think they come out net on a positive in the silly season. I'll say that.
Oh, yeah.
The roster looks better now than it did before.
I don't think there's any doubt that they come out, on the positive with the transfer situation. I mean, I think the way fans are responding, there's not as much excitement as if NC State, got one of those guys that was going to be on a top 5 or top 10 list that, one of the national outlets ranks the transfers in the portal, every year. But those guys don't necessarily pan out as, the guys that they are at their past destinations either.
Yeah, and you also have to understand the whole concept, and this is true for football and basketball. It's easy to say, let's go find an offensive tackle in the transfer portal. Let's go get this guy in the transfer portal in basketball. It's not as easy as you make it sound, right? They make that sound. It's just not as easy. And sometimes you have to remind fans that just because so-and-so from Davidson who scored 2,000 career points is in the transfer portal, NC State should go and get him. Well, guess what? Kentucky wants him too, right?
Right.
So, and so these are not it's not as simple as picking what you want out of the transfer portal. You have to go. You have to get what you can and hope it works.
Well, I really liked your point about Keve Aluma because, as you mentioned, an ACC Player of the Year candidate, averaged 15.2 points, 7.9 rebounds per game last season as an every game starter at Virginia Tech. His first 2 seasons at Wofford, averaged 2.5 points a game with just 3 starts as a freshman, 6.9 points per game, averaging 26.5 minutes per game as an every game starter as a sophomore at Wofford. Of course, he follows Mike Young up to Blacksburg, previously the Wofford head coach, so maybe there's some familiarity there, but not an apples to apples comparison, but it is proof that just because a guy didn't work out necessarily at a past program, even if it's at a lower level, which is not the case for both Morsell and Gann. I mean, I know the Big East isn't considered a Power 5 conference, but it's probably the unofficial 6th Power 5 conference in college basketball, and frankly, the talent in the Big East is probably not that much different if we're being honest with ourselves.
They're on par with they're as good as any other Power 5 league.
Right. And I guess the last point I'll make about Morsell and Gann is that both of these transfers now become the highest ranked players in terms of their recruiting rankings according to Rivals. Morsell was number 49 nationally in the 2019 class, was a standout in the Washington, D.C. prep scene. And Greg Gantt, the Fayetteville, North Carolina native, played at Trinity Christian School. He was number 55 in the class of 2019. So, theoretically here you're adding some talent to the roster. You'll see how they do in practice. It's going to be up to them how much time they get, how big of a role they get in the rotation, but maybe the fresh start is exactly what the doctor ordered for both of these guys. So we will see. We will have more on that. Be covering that on the Wolfpacker.com. Please be sure to use promo code PACK60 while you're there for a free 60-day trial on all of our premium content, news, and analysis. Let's transition to women's basketball to close out this podcast, Matt. Something I'm really excited about. I think NC State fans should be very excited about. 2 big-time transfer acquisitions for Westmore and the Wolfpack women who, had an historic season in 2020-21. I know it wasn't the ending that Wolfpack fans had hoped for. I know the team had the goal of making it to a Final Four for the second time in school history. They had a disappointing end in the Sweet 16 with a shorthanded roster. Nonetheless, they were without all-ACC forward Kayla Jones, who is coming back, along with Raina Perez, along with Kai Crutchfield. So you got all your production coming back next season. A team that was ranked in the top 5 for most of the year, earned the first number 1 seed in program history, and now they're adding Diamond Johnson of Rutgers, who was the number 6 overall recruit in the 2020 class. There were only 2 guards ranked ahead of her according to the ESPN Hoop Girls rankings. Paige Beckers and Caitlin Clark, both first team, or Caitlin Clark was a second team All-American according to the AP, but Paige Beckers, first team All-American. Those are household names in women's college basketball at this point. So if you're in the same conversation with those 2 guards, you're in pretty good company there. I'll get into her numbers in a second. The second acquisition is Madison Hayes from Mississippi State. She made the SEC All-Freshman team and was second on the Bulldogs in rebounding despite being just 6th on the team in minutes. She got her first start the end of January, and she started every contest for Mississippi State beyond that point. So 2 players coming from Power 5 programs that already made an impact at their past programs, and you have to think that both of these players are immediately going to jump into the rotation. Johnson specifically as a player that could easily contend for a starting gig on this team, and the hopes have to be very high for NC State because, as I mentioned, all 3 of those seniors are coming back. You got Kanane coming back and Jakia Brown-Turner coming back as 2. Well, Kanane was an All-American last year, and Brown-Turner was an honorable mention All-American, both first-team All-ACC selections. So this roster is going to be stacked. It's going to be even more talented than it was this past season where NC State had as good a shot as anybody to win a national title, and you have to be thinking once again that this NC State team is a team that could go win a 3rd straight ACC tournament championship, and from there we'll see about the Final Four and maybe even a national championship, because I think they're a legitimate national championship contender, even more so than they were this past season.
Yeah, on paper, I don't think there's any question. Look, you're a 1 seed, you won the ACC tournament, you beat a team. Didn't South Carolina make the Final Four?
They did.
So you beat a Final. You beat
lost
a Final Four.
Heartbreaker to the eventual national champion, Stanford.
Yeah, you beat the Final Four team on their home court. Louisville, I think, went to the Elite 8 almost. They lost a late lead, I think.
They lost to South Carolina.
Yeah, so you beat them twice.
Yep.
There's no question when you're healthy that they were good enough to beat anybody. That's the bottom line, and so and you get everybody back, and you added 2 experienced transfers, one of whom was a high impact transfer. Diamond Johnson can shoot from anywhere. You pull up her high school highlights, you see her literally shooting from just across half court with confidence, making it. She gives you an impact level of 3-point shooting.
Just to put that in perspective, let me give you Johnson's freshman year numbers. 17.6 a game, points, 4.3 rebounds, 2.5 assists. She shot 51% from the field, 45.5% on 110 3-point attempts. That means she's shooting high volume. She would have led NC State in 3-point attempts last year. She also would have been, I think she would have been second because Kai Crutchfield was on an absolute tear from the perimeter at the end of the year. I think that put her in the high 40s, but you will take a 45.5 3-point shooter with that type of volume too.
Yeah, especially the freshman, because usually shooters only get better. So, and then really, to kind of the added bonus, I really think Madison Hayes kind of gives them a lot of what they needed, which is one more player from a depth standpoint. That was the one weakness of this team with the depth, right? Jada Boyd was the 6th person of the year in the ACC. Camille Hobby gave you some admirable minutes, really stepped up in a big way to give Kanane some minutes in the post, but those were your only 2 reliable subs. Madison Hayes gave them another sub that can help with the versatility of being a perimeter wing forward type sub. Now you're adding Diamond Johnson and you're getting another starter. And I agreed with that tweet where you're getting to the point where the second team might be good enough to compete. Maybe not win the ACC, but it'd be good enough to compete in the ACC. And so, the caveat is I don't know what, I'll be blunt, I don't know what Connecticut has coming back. I know South Carolina has a dream recruiting class coming in. I don't know what they have coming back off their last team. From what I know about the ACC, I think NC State is a prohibitive favorite in the ACC next year. I know UNC brought in a heck of a recruiting class, but they lost their two best players, maybe their three best players. I know two girls were going to the WNBA. I don't know about the big girl they had. What's her name again?
Bailey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know Stephanie Watts, and I know the shooter that they had that transferred in from Illinois moved on to the WNBA. So
Janelle Bailey. I think she's going to the WNBA.
Yeah. So I don't anticipate that freshman class at UNC being what puts UNC over. Notre Dame, we'll see how far along they are in their rebuilding process. Florida State should be good. Syracuse had a lot of turnover up at Syracuse. Virginia Tech might be a sneaky good team, but on paper you would think NC State is at least a prohibitive favorite in the ACC. And then we have to see how did Connecticut, Baylor, Stanford, South Carolina, Maryland, how did those schools come out of the transfer market? I believe Connecticut got the big girl from Ohio State that was really good. They were considered the top low post transfer. So I suspect Connecticut, just based on perception and maybe reputation, might be the favorite. But bottom line is, if you're going to talk about national title contenders in women's college basketball in 2022, you're not doing your homework if you don't put NC State on the list.
Exactly. And NC State's right in that conversation with those national powerhouses, at least going into this next season. And I think they're the only ACC team at this point in time that can make that claim. Louisville would have been the only other one last season. Of course, they lose the ACC Player of the Year in Dana Evans. And I know they've got a pretty good recruiting class coming in, but it's about on par with what NC State's got coming in terms of a recruiting class. So I know their freshman Haley Van Leith is highly touted. She'll probably become the star of that team, but at least in that first meeting with NC State had up in Louisville at the Yum Center, it was pretty much the Dana Evans show with Louisville. Now, I know that the second meeting, it wasn't as much the Dana Evans show. She was getting cooking there, particularly in the second half, but they spread the ball around a little bit more in that second meeting.
But they also didn't really score that game.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean, NC State did a good job defending both times. I mean, they really shut down Louisville both times. And the fact that NC State came back from I think it was a 8-point deficit in the fourth quarter. I mean, I don't know. There's nothing bad to say about the NC State women's basketball program right now. It's just 100% good, and another reason to be excited about the mass gathering restriction being lifted, because that was something that really lacked last year. A full Reynolds Coliseum for NC State women's basketball. It better be sold out every game. This team deserves that, and I'm pretty sure I heard that Wes Moore hinted in that State of the Pack video that Jeff Gravely hosted a couple weeks back that I think the plan might be to open the season with South Carolina. Of course, that matchup will be at home because the Gamecocks and the Wolfpack agreed to a home-and-home series. NC State went down to Columbia last year, so now the Gamecocks will have to come up to Raleigh, compete in Reynolds Coliseum. I imagine if there are no capacity restrictions, that will be a full house. It'll be rocking. That'll be a great environment, a great way to kick off the women's college hoops season. So that'll do it for this podcast. We'll be back next week with some more updates, but please remember to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast wherever you listen to us. We're on the Apple Podcast app, Spotify, Google Play, anywhere you listen to podcasts. Plus, you can always listen to us on the Wolfpacker.com. While you're there, use the promo code PACK60 for a free 60-day trial on all of our premium content, news, and analysis over at the Wolfpacker.com. You can also watch this podcast on YouTube. While you're there, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and give this video a thumbs up. Follow us on social media. You can follow us on Twitter at our main account at the Wolfpacker. You can follow me personally at Justin H. Will. Give us a like on Facebook, NC State Wolfpack on the Wolfpacker.com. And for Matt Carter, this is Justin Williams, and this has been the Wolfpacker Podcast.